Hello and welcome back to Affinity for Commander. My name is Alex.
And my name's Martin.
Today you may have noticed we've changed location from our living room table to our local game shop at Netherworld Chester. We would like to thank the guys over at Netherworld Chester for letting us film there, allowing us to bring you new gameplay footage featuring new players and new decks. So, without further ado, let's get to the video.
My commander is Seton, Crozen Protector. I keep an opening hand of Arbor Elf, Boreal Druid, Great Oak Guardian, Quest for Renewal, Vanquisher's Banner, and 2 forests.
Danny's commander is Ezuri, Claw of Progress. He keeps an opening hand of Chasm Skulker, Lightning Greaves, Thought Vessel, Simic Growth Chamber, Oran Reef the Vast Wood, and an island.
Callum is playing Edgar Markov. He keeps an opening hand of Dark Imposter, Bishop of Rebirth, Dark Ritual, Feast of Blood, Unclaimed Territory, a Swamp, and a Plains.
Finally, Jonah is playing Grenzo Havoc Raiser. He keeps an opening hand containing Frenzied Goblin, Goblin Glory Chaser, Soul Ring, Howling Mine, Path of Ancestry, and 2 mountains.
I won the die roll and go first. I play a forest and cast Arbor Elf. I then pass the turn.
For Danny's turn, he plays a Lumbering Falls tapped, and then passes to Callum.
Callum plays a Swamp and then casts Dark Ritual, adding 3 black mana to his mana pool. He then uses this mana to cast Dark Impersonator. This triggers Edgar's Eminence ability, creating a 1/1 black vampire token. He then passes the turn.
On his turn, Jonah plays a mountain and then casts Soul Ring. He then taps the Soul Ring to cast Howling Mine, instantly gaining the favour of everyone at the table. He then passes the turn to Martin.
In my turn I play a forest. I then tap both of my lands, use Arbor Elf's ability to untap one and tap it again to cast my commander, Seton, Crozen Protector. I then use Seton's ability to tap him in order to produce 1 green mana and cast Boreal Druid. I then pass to Danny.
For Danny's turn, Danny plays an island. He then casts his own Soul Ring and uses it to cast Thought Vessel. He then passes turn.
Callum plays an Unclaimed Territory, choosing vampires, and then passes the turn without attacking, not wishing to make enemies at this early stage in the game.
For Jonah's turn, he plays a mountain and casts Goblin Glory Chaser. He then casts Whisper Silk Cloak and then passes to Martin.
In my turn I play Jiraga Tree Speaker and then cast Vanquisher's Banner. I then pass to Danny.
During his turn, Danny plays a Mosswort Bridge, triggering its hideaway ability, exiling card face down beneath his land. He then casts his commander, Ezuri, Claw of Progress, and then passes turn.
For his turn, Callum plays a mountain and then casts Feast of Blood, targeting my commander. This destroys Seton and Callum gains 4 life. Callum then attacks me with his 1/1 vampire and I take the 1 damage. He then passes the turn.
Jonah plays a mountain and casts his commander, Grenzo Havoc Raiser. He then equips Grenzo with Whisper Silk Cloak to give it Unblockable and Shroud. Moving to combat, Jonah forgets that his commander has Summoning Sickness and swings at Martin with Glory Chaser and at Callum with Grenzo. Unable to block, Callum takes 2 damage and Martin takes 1 damage. This triggers Goblin Glory Chaser's Renown ability, getting him a +1/+1 counter, and also triggers Grenzo's ability twice. Jonah chooses to goad Callum's Dark Imposter and Martin's Jiraga Tree Speaker, forcing them to attack an opponent other than Jonah next turn, if able. In his second main phase, Jonah casts Frenzied Goblin, and then passes the turn.
During my turn I play Rogue's Passage. I then level up my Tree Speaker and then tap her to cast Quest for Renewal, getting around Jonah's goad trigger. I then cast Juniper Order Druid, triggering Vanquisher's Banner and drawing a card. I then place 2 counters on Quest for Renewal as I have tapped 2 creatures and then pass to Danny.
For his turn, Danny plays Yavimaya Coast and casts Chasm Skulker. This triggers Ezuri, gaining an experience counter. He then casts Lightning Greaves and equips them to Ezuri. Moving to combat, Ezuri's ability triggers and Danny puts a +1/+1 counter on Chasm Skulker. He then passes turn.
On Callum's turn he plays a mountain and then casts Vampire Champion, triggering Edgar's Eminence ability once more. As a result of Grenzo's goad effect, Callum's Dark Imposter must attack either myself or Danny. Callum decides to send him at me and a vampire token at Jonah. I block with my 2/2 Juniper Order Druid, destroying both creatures, and Jonah declares no blocks, taking 1 damage. Callum then passes the turn.
Jonah starts off his turn like a typical red player and goes straight to combat. He attacks Martin with his Goblin Glory Chaser and Danny with an unblockable Grenzo. They both take 2 damage, and Jonah elects to have them both exile a top card of their libraries with Grenzo's ability, exiling a Forest and an Elvish Pioneer. Jonah casts Martin's Elvish Pioneer and uses his Enter the Battlefield trigger to put a basic mountain from his hand onto the battlefield. He then plays Path of Ancestry for his land for turn. Jonah then casts Goblin War Driver and then ends his turn.
For my turn, I recast Seton, putting another 2 counters on my quest for renewal and drawing a card from Vanquisher's Banner. I then cast Sylvan Advocate, triggering the Vanquisher's Banner again, drawing another card and getting another quest counter on Quest for Renewal. I then play a Forest and cast Ezuri, Renegade Leader, putting another counter on Quest for Renewal. I then pass the turn to Danny.
In Danny's upkeep, all of Martin's druids untap thanks to Quest for Renewal. Danny then plays a Temple of the False God and casts Altered Ego, having it enter as a copy of Martin's Ezuri, gaining an experience counter from Danny's original Ezuri. That's a lot of Ezuri. He then casts Palladium Mir, gaining another experience counter. Moving to combat, Danny puts 3 +1/+1 counters on Chasm Skulker, and also remembers he should have put 2 other counters on his Skulker from drawing 2 cards that turn. Danny then rolls a dice to decide who to attack with his Swole Squid. Martin is randomly chosen as the target, and Danny attacks him with his 7/7. Martin blocks with his Arbor Elf, which he then taps to untap a forest. He then uses this mana to activate Ezuri's ability to regenerate his Arbor Elf, preventing it from being destroyed. Danny then passes the turn.
In Callum's turn, he plays a Swamp and casts Bishop of Rebirth, creating another 1/1 vampire token from Edgar's ability. Moving to combat, he attacks Jonah with Vampire Champion, dealing him 3 damage. He then passes the turn, and in his end step, I tap Arbor Elf in order to untap one of my forests.
In Jonah's turn, he plays a mountain and then casts Goblin King, scrying 1 from Path of Ancestry. Moving to combat, he attacks Callum with both Grenzo and Goblin War Driver, who both have Mountain Walk thanks to Goblin King. Goblin War Driver's Battle Cry ability triggers, giving Grenzo +1/+0. Unable to block due to his mountain, Callum takes 7 damage. Grenzo's ability triggers twice, and Jonah chooses to goad Callum's Bishop and exile a top card of his library. This turns out to be a Rakish Heir, which Jonah then casts. He then passes the turn to Martin.
For my turn, I cast Door of Destinies, naming Druid, and then cast Kamal, Fist of Crosa. This puts a counter on the door, giving all my druids +1/+1. I then pass the turn.
For his turn, Danny draws 2 cards and puts 2 counters on Chasm Skulker. He then plays Exotic Orchard and casts Asceticism. Now safe from spot removal, he casts Colonial Hydra, which enters the battlefield with 4 +1/+1 counters. Danny then equips the Hydra with his Swiftfoot boots, before going to combat, where he then puts 3 +1/+1 counters on Chasm Skulker thanks to his commander's ability. Remembering his last rather unsuccessful combat step, Danny removes Martin from the decision making on whom to attack. He then randomly selects Jonah to feel the brunt of his mighty Hydra. Attacking triggers the Hydra's ability, doubling the number of counters on itself and Chasm Skulker. This makes the Skulker a 22/22. Jonah blocks with his 2 stolen creatures, which both swiftly die, and Jonah takes 5 damage due to trample. In his second main phase, Danny moves his Swiftfoot boots back onto his commander, and then passes the turn.
In Callum's turn, his Bishop of Rebirth is forced to attack myself or Danny due to Jonah's goad trigger. He elects to attack me, triggering the Bishop's ability, returning Dark Imposter to the battlefield from his graveyard. I block with my now 6/4 Kamal, destroying the Bishop. In his second main phase, Callum casts Thran Dynamo, and uses it to cast Champion of Dusk, creating another vampire token. When the champion enters, Callum draws 7 cards and loses 7 life. He then discards down to 7 and passes the turn, to which I respond by untapping a Forest of Arbor Elf.
Jonah plays another mountain and moves to combat. He attacks Danny with Grenzo and Callum with Goblin Glory Chaser and Goblin War Driver, triggering the War Driver's Warcry ability. Due to Mountain Walk, Callum is unable to block Jonah's goblins and takes 7 damage. Grenzo's ability triggers, causing Danny to exile the top card of his library, and Callum to exile the top 2. Danny exiles Sandworm Convergence, whereas Callum exiles a Plains and Ghastly Conscription. Jonah chooses to cast the Sandworm Convergence, liking the idea of 5/5 Worm in each of his end steps. Jonah creates one such worm token in his end step and then passes to Martin.
I play a forest and then cast Gilt Leaf Druid, putting another counter on Door of Destinies and drawing a card from Vanquish's banner. I then tap 7 druids and gain control of all of Danny's land. Forever. Who said Druid Tribal would be rubbish? I then cast Beastmaster's Ascension with my newly acquired Temple of the False God and then pass the turn.
In Danny's upkeep, Martin uses his untapped Legion of Druids to gain control of Callum's lands as well. This made the rest of the table very angry and has been widely regarded as a bad move. Danny plays an island for turn and casts Bioshift, moving all of his counters from Chasm Skulker onto his Colonial Hydra. He then moves to combat and puts a further 3 counters on the Hydra thanks to Ezuri's ability, making it a 35/35 with Trample. Danny then attacks Martin with the Hydra, triggering its ability, doubling the counters on it, making it a 70/70 with Trample. Martin takes more than lethal damage and is knocked out of the game. Danny and Callum are promptly reunited with their lands, and Danny passes the turn.
Callum plays a Plains and casts Radiant Destiny, choosing Vampires, and gaining the city's blessing for having more than 10 permanents. He then casts Legion Lieutenant, buffing his vampires further and gaining another 1/1 vampire. Not yet satisfied with his army, Callum casts Call to the Feast, creating 3 white 1/1 vampire tokens of lifelink. We then have a quick tidy up of tokens, and he passes the turn to Jonah.
Knowing that he has no answer to Danny's hexproof Hydra, Jonah attacks Callum with his War Driver, exiling the top card of his library with Grenzo's ability to try and dig for an answer. Callum takes 3 damage and exiles a swamp. How unfortunate. Jonah moves to his end step, creating another 5/5 worm token, and passes to Danny, knowing full well that Hydra is going to be removing another player from the game this turn.
Danny starts his turn by putting 2 more counters on Chasm Skulker as a result of drawing cards, and then plays Oran Reef the Vastwood tapped. He then casts Thrumming Bird, forgetting that its ability only triggers when it deals damage to a player. As a result, Danny proliferates on its entry to the battlefield. This doesn't make any difference to the game in the long run, as Danny then casts Overwhelming Stampede. This gives all of his creatures +71/+71 and trample until the end of turn. He then moves to combat and swings Calonian Hydra and Chasm Skulker at Jonah, and Palladian Myr, his commander, and the Ezuri clone at Callum. This causes Jonah and Callum to take an overwhelming amount of damage, winning the game for Danny.
Well, that's it for this week's game. We hope you enjoy it. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe, and feel free to tell us about your experiences with unreasonably huge tramply creatures in the comments below. See you next time.